Hello, guys. It's finally time. It's finally time. Okay, let's get started. So, first things first, before we get into the guide, a few things to know. As you just saw a mapping showcase, that was a tier 16 alleyways with around 30% more monster life at awakening level 7 with multiple damage mods. So, like, for instance, on the end boss there, I was playing it very safe, moving a lot because I didn't want to get chunked by his slam because there were multiple damage mods on the map. Anyway, intros. First and foremost, one thing you will see me glancing to the right every once in a while, this is where my notes are. Forewarning, this is going to be a very long video. There will be chapters and timestamps to very specific parts of the video. If you only need one or two things from the video or whatever, you can skip around. Feel free to use the timestamps in the chapters, to the most effect. Use it wherever you need to jump around, okay? But for people who sit through all of this, hopefully it will teach you a lot, just not about the build, but also about the game, and it can help you, further improve other builds that you do in the future, or just pushes in general. So, first and foremost, I'm going to plug this at the very beginning of the video. It's something that I don't really like doing, but I have to play the algorithm here. Please subscribe if this video helps you. Please sub, hit the the notification bell, and thumbs the video up. I put a lot of work into this. I'm really excited to show you guys. And I don't want to plug it at the very end of probably a 40 minute video. This is going to be a long in-depth thing, so I'm going to put it at the very front. Everyone who does, thank you very much. I appreciate all the support. So, who am I? Well, I'm Physics, a newer content creator for Path of Exile. My focus is on specifically hardcore solo self-found content. This is my favorite content in the game, my favorite mode to play. And typically what I will do, my favorite form of content to put out, is to take a build that viewers vote on from a predetermined list of builds and try to take it from level 1 all the way to Downing Awakener 8 and Maven rather, and documenting the progress of the build along the way. That's what all the build diary series on my channel thus far have kind of been about. So I enjoy ladder resets and pushing ladder at league start. That's one of the most fun things for me. I started the game back in 3.0 and learned the game primarily through HCSSF blind, without a lot of guides or walkthroughs. Obviously I sollowed builds, but in terms of the actual game, I learned the game blind, the bosses and whatnot. I played a little bit of softcore and hardcore trade right before making the jump to SSF at the end of my first league. And at the end of my first league, I had not even made it to maps. So the past few leagues, I've managed to hold rank 1 for my chosen ascendancy and around top 25 or higher overall for the first few days of the week before dying somewhere in the 90s, which is exactly what happened with this character. Dying, funnily enough, to Phoenix Slam about a quarter of the way through 96, I believe. I'm not the best or most knowledgeable player, but I'm always trying to improve. I love talking about PoE, and I have a very large amount of time in the game, nearly 7,500 hours of played. I know that's, dwarfed compared to especially some other content creators, but it is definitely a decent chunk of time in the game. So for this guide, it is about Earthshatter Berserker. I use this to hold rank 1 Berserker and Marauder overall, actually, at the end of day 1 all the way through to the end of week 1. I believe it might have been day 6 or day 7. I think I died on day 5 or day 6, and then it took people a while to catch up. For a while I was the only Marauder in top 50. There were a few people that started to edge in towards the high 40s, and then they died and fell back out. So for quite a while this was the only Marauder build in top 50. So it's capable. So a few things to note before we swap over. A few things to note. This build, this guide that I have for you, this POB, it is not min-max gear to the teeth, okay? This is made to be reasonable gear capable of 99% of the content in the game within a few days of playing. And how I achieved this is I literally imported all the gear I had at the time of my character's death, and then I tell you exactly how to get and craft every single piece in the guide, okay? So the order of the guide will go as follows. First, we will go over the passive tree, all the leveling passives, and I will explain the tree. Next, we will go over the skill gems, all the gems used while leveling, and then the end game setup. Next, we will go over actual leveling tips and advice for leveling your character. After that, we will go over explaining certain key mechanics to the build. Then we will start breaking into endgame. Endgame will consist of discussion about the Impale mechanics, Annoints, how Defy Pain works, the endgame gym setup, Pantheons, Warcry Rotations, base type analysis, crafting, etc. Okay? All right, so with that out of the way, let us hop over. So, at the very start, let me hide my ladder chart here. All right, so at the very start of the tree, okay, this is how you're gonna path up until level 15. Now you may question why I rush Admonisher, and the reason I rush Admonisher is because I don't think there's been a lot of discussion about this, and once we get to the notes section, I will go over that, but I don't like leveling a Spectral Helix. I'll leave it at that for now. I like leveling with Sunder as soon as I hit level 12, okay? Next up, 15 to 32. You'll path over for Art of the Gladiator, pick up Rampart with the Fortify Mastery so you can get Fortify as soon as possible. Grab Measured Fury and take the Warcry Mastery for Warcry 7 minimum of 10 power. Also, on Admonisher, you want to take the Warcry Mastery for Exerted Attacks, deal extra damage, and Warcries cannot exert travel skills. This is really big because around Act 2, preferably by Act 3 at the latest, you will have your Leap Slam with faster attacks and life tap support. Once you get that in a 3-link, I swap off of Smoke Mine and into Leap Slam. Anyway, after that, you path to Soul of Steel. Armor is really good now, and you will take the Determination Mana Reservation Efficiency node. This is when you can start running Determination, etc. All right. Into Cruel Lab, you'll then path down through Bloodless, grab Steadfast for the extra fortification, and start pathing over towards Resolute Technique, while also grabbing Deep Breaths and the Warcry Mastery for healing on Warcry. After this, you have Merc Lab, grabbing the Barbarism node, Harpooner, Juggernaut, coming up and grabbing the Constitution Wheel. So a lot of life, getting Impale chance, getting ready to swap over from Herald of Ash to Impale, and then at last the endgame setup where we're fully decked out with Prismatic Skin. We have our Mace nodes, we have Devotion, we have Tireless, you know, fully decked out tree here, okay? Full Constitution Wheel and everything. All right, so we'll go through the gyms real quick. So level 1 through 12, you'll want to mule a Splitting Steel from a duelist. All you got to do is run to town and grab it. So this league start, I leveled with Ground Slam, and I've played a lot around, especially like during gauntlets and stuff, like using Splitting Steel over Ground Slam and going back and forth. Splitting Steel is definitely better. It's just I'm lazy on league start, and I don't feel like I can die. It is definitely faster though to use Splitting Steel over Ground Slam till level 12. The steel skills are like ridiculously overpowered. They will carry you really hard. It's just I never liked on the tree. It's not as good as it is on duelists because these nodes are melee physical damage and the steel skills are projectiles, which means your base damage by the end of Act 1 can be quite low. However, War Banner, placing War Banner during like boss fights on Brutus and Merveil will carry your damage quite a lot. It helps significantly. And then Chance to Bleed, you have the dot as well as added flat fizz whenever you hit a bleeding target. It's quite good. This is definitely the best leveling setup to hit level 12 with, right? You have Ancestral Protector with War Banner, and then either Dash or Frostblink. So you can path up to Versatility. I do not like doing this. You have a Dex node here and you have an Int node here. What I normally do is I just look for a Jade or a Intelligence Amulet. I can't remember the name right now. A Jade or an Intelligence Amulet early on. You can buy them from Nessa for I think a Transmute as well, and then start using that. But if you don't like that, you can always just spend 2 points early and grab Versatility. It's 20 Dex and in, and then use the skill of your choice. Next up for 12 through 18, we have Sunder, and the links for the main skills are color coded here. We have Sunder in a red green setup, and basically you just slot in Sunder, take out Splitting Steel. So you still have the Onslaught and Chance to Bleed. Ancestral Protector with War Banner and now Blood and Sand. Basically while leveling, I will just stay in Blood stance, have the extra damage. It helps a lot. Here we slot in Vitality, Smoke Mine, and Intimidating Cry. Next up, 18 through 31, you now add in melee fizz in the place of chance to bleed and close combat support if you have it. One thing to note is that if this is for axes, if you decide to level up as a mace, you can slot out close combat and use shockwave support instead. Okay. So starting around this level, you'll have Herald of Ash. Once you get to Act 3, you'll put in Determination, still using Vitality. Something to note, you do not want to put, I know it says level 20 here, I just didn't change it, I forgot to change it. You don't want to have a max level Vitality, you don't want to level it up every time. You should prioritize Determination and then Herald of Ash, and then whatever level Vitality you can comfortably use while having enough mana to not feel terrible while playing, right? Leap Slam, again, it says swap after getting the full 3 link. Leap Slam, faster attacks, and Life Tap. Life Tap is really important now. Yeah. So until this, you'll just keep using Smoke Mine. Intimidating Cry, Enduring Cry, Infernal Cry, and Second Wind. So why Infernal Cry? Well, basically, Infernal Cry will just help your clear. Additionally, you'll Infernal Cry, and then all the mobs, when one mob explodes, he'll explode. When one mob dies, he'll explode, and everything else will explode in the radius. And it just helps with clear early on because we're not running Herald of Purity yet. So Rallying Cry doesn't really give us any damage. So this is just a little bit faster for leveling. And then Ancestral War Chief. You're going to want to swap over from Ancestral Protector to Ancestral War Chief once you get to Act 3. Next up, 31 to 38. Basically for Earthshatter, I swap to Earthshatter as soon as I get the second Warcry node and Fortify, right? So it doesn't need to necessarily be 31, but once you get those nodes, swap over. So we have Earthshatter, Onslaught, Close Combat Support, and Melee Fizz. Again, if you're using Maces, slot out Close Combat for Shockwave support, which you also get in Act 2. Still using Herald of Ash with Determination and Vitality. Still using Leap Slam. Still using this General Cry setup. Basically what changes is swapping to Earthshatter and slotting in Berserk. You can use Berserk while leveling now, especially with the Warcries have a minimum of 10 power. This used to be on a cluster jewel called Cry Wolf. And them putting it on the tree is a massive buff, not just to Berserker overall. It's like amazing SSF quality of life buff, amazing two-handed Berserker play buff, amazing Rage Vortex buff. Like this is a very good node to have for one passive point on the tree. All right, 38 and onward. We will now be using Earthshatter with Onslaught, Close Combat Support, and Fist of War. So again, Close Combat, you will socket that out for Shockwave. If you guys don't want to use Onslaught and you have like a bad base type, etc., you can always just take out Onslaught if you're struggling for damage and put something else in, like, you know, the Melee Fizz, the Brutality, anything like that that you see in the endgame setup. So Herald of Ash still, Determination, Blood and Sand, Leap Slam, still all the cries, everything else is the same, right? Now moving into endgame, you'll notice there's a 7-link setup here. I will go over this first. They are ordered in order from least to most important in the links. Basically, Shockwave, and arguably, it's something I was testing the day I died actually, but you could slot out like Melee Fizz or Brutality while clearing on like a 5-link or a 4-link and use Shockwave instead. Shockwave is actually really, really strong after the skill gem nerfs. And actually feels really, really good to use. Obviously, I don't have a lot of experience with Shockwave because why the hell would anyone ever play Maces before this league? So it's my first league playing around with Maces. So we were testing Shockwave the day I died, but it's definitely really strong, and I will go into more depth on that later. So again, in order of importance from most to least important, ideally, and then for bossing, take out Shockwave and slot in Melee Fizz. There is some stuff I've seen where you can try to get max Impale on your gear and then just have Shockwave in full time and take Impale Gem out. I'm not going to do that in this guide. Like I said, this guide is not going to cover like min-max jewels and having like hunter gloves and stuff like that for the most part. It's just going to be like relatively attainable gear for most people. I don't want to have influence gear in every single slot. We're already running a few pieces of influence gear, so I want it to be like easily digestible to people, right? The very last thing that we have to go over here is ascendancies. So In first lab, you will take Warbringer. This is tons of damage, rage generation, amazing node, very strong. In Cruel lab, I take Aspect of Carnage. You can take Defy Pain in Cruel lab if you're scared of dying. You know, you haven't played HCSSF a lot. If you have a good weapon base, especially, and you're not pining for damage, you can take Defy Pain second. These two are completely interchangeable based on what you want. If you want more survivability or you just want more damage, right? So in Merciless lab, you will take the one that you did not take previously. And then in Uber lab, you'll take Crave the Slaughter. Additional rage on hit with attacks. It helps a little bit with keeping Berserk up, and then plus 10 to max rage. Again, more Berserk uptime. And then the small node also gives attack speed. 6% attack speed is quite nice. 10% increased fizz. It's all right. All right, with all of that out of the way, we will now move over to notes. Now, there's a lot here. Again, there will be timestamps. I'm going to go over everything I possibly can in as much detail as I can, okay? So for early leveling, you want to use the vendor recipe, which is a magic or a rare rustic sash with 1 blacksmith whetstone and 1 alteration orb. This will always give you a weapon with % increased physical damage. It's essentially a mandatory recipe to use whilst leveling melee characters. Start looking for whetstones and alterations for the recipe in Act 1. If you don't know, vendoring unID'd rares can give you transmutes, and ID'd rares can give you alterations. I believe that's the case. It might be the opposite, but I believe that's the case. I'm brain farting. Anyway, this makes a massive difference in your damage plus quality of life. This recipe also leaves your weapon with an open suffix. Very important, because at League Start, you have certain crafts unlocked instantly. So you can actually get the % fizz damage and then craft on resist in the suffix slot for just 1 transmute orb. So next, moving on. Upgrade your weapon bases frequently. This is very important for leveling physical builds, melee builds. You can find a list of all the base types and what level they require for axes at this link and maces at this link. I highly suggest you use this, especially if you're not familiar with the base types or leveling melee builds. This will help a lot. It'll give you a good idea of what levels you're going to be looking for upgrades. Now, axes versus maces while leveling. Axes are inherently a better base type over maces. They have higher base damage and better nodes on the tree, especially attack speed nodes and stuff like that, which can help a lot with quality of life, especially while bossing when you don't have onslaught and the like. Normally, I would recommend only leveling as axes and would not consider maces, as you do not need the chill that the maces provide until higher content. However, with melee physical support having less attack speed multiplier, it can feel quite awkward while leveling, and maces have the distinct advantage of being able to use shockwave support. If you decide to level with maces, remember that you cannot use close combat support, so that will be the link you'll want to replace for shockwave. I only really started playing around with testing shockwave the day before my death, but my initial impressions were quite good. I've not yet leveled using a mace with shockwave myself, but it is 100% viable. I did last night test it out a little bit. I took a guy from Act 6 or so to maps using shockwave because that was the lowest level berserker I had, and it felt amazing. Felt amazing for clear. It cuts down on the amount of call of steals you need to use as well, which helps a lot. So next, the hot topic. Everyone, why do you use Sunder? Quantric uses Helix. Okay, I typically recommend and use Sunder myself because it hits multiple times and can be used from range. This, combined with Intimidating Cry, which doubles your damage on exerted attacks, allows you to get multiple instances of damage with Intimidating Cry early on before investing into all the Warcry nodes and getting second wind and using Earthshatter. I tried using Spectral Helix for leveling a test character recently because people kept mentioning it to me. I think the skill does great at the end of Act 1 through Act 2 and starts to fall off through Act 3. Spectral Helix has very high base damage numbers, and if you're using a good weapon, it's quite easy to just throw 1 Helix out intermittently as you run through a zone and clear trash and net easy XP. However, the skill is mechanically very wonky and feels quite terrible in my personal opinion. I'll likely still use Sunder myself for leveling, but if you prefer Helix, it's completely okay, it's viable. You're going to be swapping to Earthshatter by the end of Act 3 anyway, so what you decide to use, you won't be using for long. It's not super important. So why do you use Splitting Steel, even in the endgame setup? This is an Impale build, so we utilize Call of Steel, which is a secondary skill you'll get anytime you have a Steel skill socketed into your gear. This helps immensely with clear speed, especially with Seismic Cry being nerfed and the general AoE of slam skills being reduced. Effectively, what you'll do is hit the screen with 1 to 2 Earthshatters, use the Call of Steel, the screen will explode. It's a very satisfying playstyle in my personal opinion, and it's somewhat reminiscent of a like Ignite Proliferation or Essence Drain playstyle in the way that the Impales can kind of like shotgun and proliferate throughout mobs. This also means that the more dense mobs are, the stronger your build is for clearing. Now, Rage Vortex. Yes, this is technically an Earthshatter guide. However, you can play this as Rage Vortex. Earthshatter will have better clear by a long shot. Rage Vortex will have a much easier time for bossing due to it effectively being a damage over time skill. One thing to note, I was actually rank 1 Berserker last league as well, running Rage Vortex. I was using one-handed shield variant. I did not have Red Blade Banner until way later on, so it is viable without the Red Blade Banner, especially with the Warcry node on the tree now. That gives you 10 to minimum power. And this only got buffed this league. It's much stronger. So yeah, definitely doable. I've played them both quite a lot. Feel free to play around with both and find what you prefer. The links are the same. Just replace close combat support if using an axe, or shockwave support if using a mace, with rage support, as shockwave support cannot support Rage Vortex, right? One important note for Rage Vortex though is that in addition, I'll go over it when I get to the Berserk stuff, but basically Rage Vortex can be more hectic to play because of the way Berserker kind of works with the Warcry nodes. There's a lot of bouncing of mechanics, a lot of min-maxing of Berserk uptime. It can be like quite hectic and quite stressful. So how do you keep up Berserk? Berserk Warcry builds themselves are incredibly high APM, action per minute builds. They are a lot more intense to play over other Warcry builds such as Slayer and Champion because of having to balance rage around your Berserk. You'll be constantly min-maxing Berserk uptime, and that can make the playstyle a lot more hectic and hard to swallow for newer players to the archetype. A large nuance of the build is becoming more comfortable with your rotation and improving your game sense around Berserk so that you can more so feel when it is appropriate to fight the degen or let the Berserk fall off and reset. This just comes with time put into the build and the archetype and can't really be taught. It takes practicing your situational awareness to the point where you can decide when it is effective to keep Berserk up versus letting it fade. Remember that Berserk is not only a damage buff, it grants a large damage reduction buff as well, meaning it is incredibly important to have it up for high damage intake situations, such as Phoenix Slam if you decide to eat that. So, Rage Vortex only adds to this stressful playstyle because it is constantly also eating rage, and then you only gain rage from Warcrying if you Warcry below 25 rage. So you will constantly it'll be bouncing all over the place. It is definitely very hectic. So the build's not for everybody. If you do decide to play Rage Vortex, just keep in mind that it is even crazier than normal Berserker Warcries. So the last thing here, Impale and how it works. Basically, a portion of the damage you deal is stored and dealt back to the target each time you hit them. Impale has a very large synergy with slams because slams hit incredibly hard, meaning a very large amount of damage is stored and then applied back to the target when you hit them. This also makes Call of Steel very effective for map clear, as you can hit mobs only one time, Call of Steel, and all the Impales are ripped out from the monsters, causing a large AoE explosion around each one. For single target, you want to do the opposite. You can ignore the Call of Steel mechanic and just slam the boss. Call of Steel is purely just used as a clear speed boost. Now into endgame tips. I'm going to go over a lot of things here, so just bear with me. Again, timestamps. Continue to use the Impale Mastery that grants increased AoE plus use speed for Call of Steel until you get a Florida Steel Jewel. After that, respect the Mastery for reduced mana reservation on Dread Banner. For specifically reduced mana reservation on Dread Banner, I take that Mastery node because it really cuts down your reliance on minus mana cost crafts on your rings, the Elrion crafts. It gives you a lot more breathing room with your mana. It feels pretty nice. It's nice quality of life. Annoints. Zooming maps, Graceful Assault. Basically gives you Onslaught on kill and a bunch of Onslaught effectiveness. Feels very good. You get to be a budget raider. Damage, Spine Cruncher or Bastion Breaker, depending on what oils you get. Spine Cruncher is a little bit more increased fizz damage. Bastion Breaker has a bunch of Overwhelm. The usefulness of Overwhelm in the game is up for debate. There was a few patches ago where they drastically increased the armor level of mobs, and it is safe to assume that the newer mobs they've added to the game have higher and higher armor values, but we don't know any of the values, so it's really hard to actually objectively quantify the usefulness of the stat. However, it is safe to assume that they are, over time, making the monsters tankier or giving them higher fizz mitigation stats. Take whatever you feel comfortable with. Don't sweat it too much. Just, if you get the oils for one, take that. If you get the oils for the other one, you can take that. Now, Defy Pain. What's up with Defy Pain? Am I going to kill myself to it? Probably not. In fact, the defensive changes this patch were a massive buff overall to Berserker, especially since our main form of defense heavily relies on armor plus physical mitigation. This league, with armor being so buffed and determination seeing use in this build, it is honestly much safer than past leagues, though you will still eventually want to get 100% Fizz Reflect reduction. One important note, you need to be using all armor-based types, the exception being boots, where you can use two tones that have evasion plus armor, or fugitive boots that have evasion plus ES. This is for extra resistances. Armor is incredibly strong now and is mandatory to help with Defy Pain mitigation. If you find yourself getting chunked before finding better gear, like an influence chest piece, you can spec into the Vanquisher notable on the tree. I recommend using the search bar if you don't know where that is, and take the physical mastery that gives 60% reduced Fizz Reflect, and spec out later after getting either reduced reflect physical rings or Warlord influence chest piece with 100% reduced physical reflect damage taken. Now, why not Yugal Pantheon? Well, the reason I don't recommend taking the Yugal Pantheon is because you are much more likely to die from getting shocked and blasted than you are from Defy Pain. Defy Pain can definitely pose a somewhat of a risk. If you have high armor values, especially if you're using determination and whatnot, Defy Pain will chunk like a quarter of your HP bar, maybe even a third of your HP bar if your armor is questionable and you have a ton of life but low armor values. But more so, Defy Pain is not ever going to outright kill you. It would be, you're in a really sticky situation, you're having like a close call where you get really low and then Defy Pain procs. Those are the situations where Defy Pain can get you killed, not necessarily like you hit 10 stacks and then you get smacked for 10,000 damage and die, right? So, the extra like 5 passive points on the tree to get the 60% reduced, I think is much more useful versus going for the Pantheon, even though the Pantheon is technically lower effort, because you have to give up Gruth Coal. And Gruth Coal is 60% reduce effective shock, just for free. And shock is the main killer of a lot of players in hardcore before they get ailment immunity. So 100%, I always recommend taking the Gruth Coal Pantheon over the Yugal Pantheon and getting the reduced reflect elsewhere. I went over this in the gyms, but I'll go over it one more time. Why do you have a 7 link in the endgame setup? General mapping, use Shockwave, slot in melee fizz for bosses. What Pantheons do you take and why? I did just slightly touch on it, but we'll go in a little bit more depth here. So this patch with Pantheons being reworked, taking Soul of the Brine King plus Soul of Gruth Coal lets you be freeze and pseudo shock and chill immune. Grab these Pantheons, use the Divine Vessels to upgrade them, and use the reduced effective shock plus chill craft on either gloves or boots. It is a suffix craft to trivialize ailments. If you're playing hardcore, do not ignore this. This is very important for staying alive in the endgame. This is how you will be achieving ailment immunity on this build. Warcry Rotation. What do? Okay, so Warcry Rotations are separated into 2 different parts. There's mapping and bossing. Typically for general mapping, you only need 1 to 2 Earthshatters to clear entire screens, so your gameplay will typically look like Slam, Slam, Cry, Call of Steel, Slam, Intimidating Cry, Call of Steel, etc. Effectively, slam anywhere from 1 to 3 times as you move. Use a Warcry to pop the pillars, and then Call of Steel afterwards to clean up any stragglers. The actual order / rotation of the Warcries is not very important here, as you don't need all the damage from Intimidating Cry and Rallying Cry, and Call of Steel will clean up anything that Earthshatter doesn't. As a general rule of thumb, try to keep Rallying Cry up as much as possible. Use Intimidating Cry to help pop pillars and for tanky rares, and use Enduring Cry to help pop pillars and to keep max endurance charges. For bossing, there are 2 rotations for bossing, one based off the old Seismic rotation, and a newer one revolving around Rallying Cry. Try both and see what you prefer. The DPS is relatively the same. The new Rallying Cry rotation, which is the one that I use, is Rallying Cry, 3 Earthshatters, Intimidating Cry, 3 Earthshatters, repeat. Typically how I play this is following the rotation and using Enduring Cry as needed to keep up endurance charges to heal after being hit by the boss. And typically it's the Cry that I'll use to break pillars if I have to move mid-rotation to help kind of like buffer and reset the cooldown on the other 2 Warcries. This is my preferred rotation after Seismic Cry got deleted from the game. Rest in peace, Seismic Cry. So the older rotation is Rallying Cry, slam twice, Intimidating Cry, slam 3 times, Enduring Cry to explode everything. You do lose a little bit of effectiveness. You're only using 4 exerts from Rallying Cry instead of all 6 this way, but it is viable if that's what you want to do. One thing to know is that also with this rotation, you will Enduring Cry, and then like after the Enduring Cry, you still have 2 Rallying Cries left, so you can slam twice and then Intimidating Cry, and then slam again 3 times. But then after 2 cycles of this rotation, you will have to Enduring Cry into Rallying Cry, and I don't like double war crying, especially during bosses. It feels clunky, and I feel like I am gonna get hit. Now, on to base types. Best bases: Coronal Maul versus Imperial Maul. An analysis of the base types. Okay, so Coronal Maul gives 20% increased area of effect with 1.2 attack speed and 91 to 136 base physical damage, while Imperial Maul gives 10% increased strength, with a 1.1 attack speed and a 102 to 153 base physical damage. To put it plainly, Coronal is going to give you the ability to map a lot faster and is less reliant on having a very good craft because it has higher base attack speed. Imperial Maul is the better endgame setup, especially for bossing, but the weapon will also need to be crafted as like very well, as the 1.1 attack speed without a high % attack speed suffix roll will feel miserable to play and will lead you to constantly cancel your Earthshatter animation and then not have damage. One important and overlooked fact is that with increased AoE on Earthshatter, you have pseudo survivability. A lot of people are like, why are you taking so much AoE? Like, that's less damage on Earthshatter. You want as much overlap as possible. Well, for 2 things. 1, I'm pushing ladder. I care about going fast, right? 2, fighting the Maven 10 ways was incredibly safe with all the AoE. I didn't have to interact with the bosses at all. I just walked around in a circle around the outside of the Maven arena and just slammed, and everything died. I did not have to interact with the bosses. I did not have to get close to the bosses. So this is one thing that's super overlooked, is that this in a way gives you pseudo survivability because you're effectively playing a range skill when you have a ton of AoE. It's very comfortable. It's like smaller AoE is definitely more damage on paper, but it's also definitely more dangerous because of how close you have to be to your target. Just it's a feel it out thing. Feel it out, see what you like, go from there. Max DPS will 100% be smallest AoE as possible, using an Imperial, things like that, and then not speccing AoE nodes on the tree. But if you care the most about survivability, maybe look into some AoE. Just see what you like. TLDR, early to mid game and mapping as fast as possible, Coronal Maul, bossing with as much damage and survivability as possible, and super endgame, Imperial Maul. Why did I personally use a Coronal Maul? Well, as I said before, pushing XP in the ladder at League Start, I cared much more about map speed and had 0 issues, even like one-shotting things at T16 maps. I also fought Cirrus with the Coronal and had no issues. Go with what you prefer. The only exception to this rule is that if you plan to do serious endgame bossing a lot, Imperial will be better likely. So one thing to note in the showcase of the mapping, that like I said, it was High Awakening level, the boss had increased health. There were multiple damage and tanky mods on the map. So, yep. Moving on to the next one. We're about to get into crafting. Okay, this is going to be in-depth. I tried my best to make it as easy to follow as possible. If you need additional help, feel free to reach out to me. Discord, Twitter, YouTube comments, you know, whatever, my Twitch, whatever. I'm live every day. Okay. So first we'll go over item level and its importance for crafting. If you don't know, gear in Path of Exile has affixes. Craftable affixes consist of prefixes and suffixes. Okay. These affixes have tiers that determine the strength of their rolls. Item level is important because higher tier affixes are locked behind higher item levels. For example, a very large breakpoint to aim for on melee builds is to rush tier 6 maps as fast as possible, as item level 73 weapons can roll up to tier 2% increased physical damage. Note that higher item level bases are not more likely to roll higher tier modifiers, however, they are able to roll higher tier modifiers. So getting higher item level bases is always desirable, but not necessarily mandatory outside of certain key pieces of equipment. You can check required item levels as well as possible affix rolls and the likelihood to roll them, also known as the weighting, at craftofexile.com. The site is absolutely invaluable, cannot stress it enough, for any and all crafting. Learning to navigate this site will help progress you much faster and improve your overall understanding of crafting in the game. Definitely use this site. Cannot recommend it enough. Don't take anything else away from the guide. Use Craft of Exile, okay? How do I craft my endgame maces? Well, there are two main ways to go about crafting your weapon: harvest and essences. You'll want to utilize both to maximize your odds of receiving a good weapon as soon as possible, as it's incredibly important for this build, as well as essence and harvest Atlas passives. Both are in Haywark Hamlet, so you can farm both of them at the same time. For crafting melee weapons, there are 4 key stats to prioritize. Percent increased physical damage, i.e. 100% increased physical damage, as an example. Flat physical damage, for example, adds 35 to 55 physical damage. Attack speed, for example, plus 20% attack speed. And then hybrid percent physical damage, for example, plus 100 accuracy, plus 20% physical damage. Now for essences, you will only want to slam your item with Shrieking, which is tier 2, or Deafening, which is tier 1, essences of Contempt. These guarantee a flat physical damage roll. Farm a large amount of essences and hit your mace until you get a good roll on 2 of the 4 stats listed above, such as 130% increased physical damage with 15% attack speed. Since a Condemned also puts on flat physical, you have a decent weapon. Important note, you cannot craft on hybrid percent physical, you can only roll it. So for the best possible rolls, you will want as high physical percent hybrid as possible, and then bench craft on tier 1 Fizz, which is a craft that costs 1 exalt. Or get at least tier 2% physical, and yeah, getting tier 2% physical with like preferably an attack speed roll if you could. If you don't hit tier 2 or higher percent physical, then the tier 1% physical bench craft with a hybrid roll is going to be as good or better. So don't just think if you don't get a really high percent Fizz roll, like 160% increased Fizz on the weapon, that it's trash. If you get a decent hybrid roll, you can bench craft on the Fizz percent roll and it'll still be a good weapon. Attack speed isn't absolutely mandatory early on, but for the endgame weapon, you will absolutely need percent attack speed rolls. Especially for bossing, you're not going to have onslaught and frenzy charges and all that stuff to carry your attack speed. While mapping, you can early on and it feels okay, but you definitely are going to need attack speed on your endgame setup. One thing to note, this is if you're using a Coronal Maul or a different base. If you're using a Imperial Maul, 100% you need attack speed rolls. 100% you'll need attack speed rolls. Imperial Maul is such a slow weapon. It's basically the Karui chopper of the maces, right? Now moving on to harvest. Slam your mace with all harvest reroll crafts listed here in order of importance / likelihood of getting good stats. First and foremost are physical rerolls are greater than attack rerolls are greater than speed rerolls. Use the stat prioritization listed above and just slam until you get what you need. Remember, there are beast crafts for add suffix, remove prefix if you have no annuls and end up with a good weapon that needs a percent fizz craft but has full prefix slots, as well as the opposite. Add prefix, remove suffix if you need to open a suffix slot for attack speed. You can also sometimes get lucky and make an insane item with these rerolls. There are also harvest, keep prefixes, reroll suffixes, and keep suffixes, reroll prefixes. So if you get an insane prefix roll with great fizz percent and great flat, but the item has no open suffixes and no attack speed roll, you can use a keep prefix, reroll suffix craft, and it has a high percent chance to roll attack speed. Now moving on to my other gear. So like I said originally, all of this gear is completely just yoinked from my character as he was when he died. Okay, so we have a Chronal Maul, 686 DPS. You can definitely craft something a lot better than this. So as you can see, I got a decent hybrid percent fizz roll, a good chunk of flat fizz. I think that's tier 2 flat fizz. And then I bench crafted on percent fizz, exactly as I said in the guide. It's also quality to 28% using Syndicate. This is not a Syndicate guide. I'm not going in how to do that. Helmet, a lot of life, a ton of life. It's got strength, so that strength is effectively 16 more life. So 96 life plus 13 life plus 16 life with some resist. A ton of life on the helmet with quite a high armor roll as well. For the chest piece, this is a Warlord Influence chest piece that has a decent life roll with a percent increased life craft, and most importantly, the reduce reflect fizz craft that I was talking about earlier. This is eventually what you want to get. Look for a Warlord item and get this on there. I think this also might spawn on Elder bases as well, but I'm not sure. It definitely has a much better weighting on Warlord. So Warlord is ideally what you want. You don't have to get an Astral Plate. You will at the very least want a hybrid armor whatever base, armor evasion, armor energy shield base at the absolute minimum. Do not use like an evasion base or something like that, even if you manage to get a bunch of reds on it. At the very least, it needs to be a hybrid armor chest piece, preferably a pure armor chest piece, optimally an astral. Okay, so this was still something that I was going to recraft. I was in the process of recrafting this, as it's not a very amazing chest piece, but it had the reduced reflect fizz, so I was using it. Onto the gloves. Spiked gloves for percent melee damage. It's a nice damage boost. They roll dex, which is nice. They have increased armor, tier 1 life, or tier 2 life, possibly tier 1 or tier 2 life. A good lightning res roll, a good chaos roll, and then crafted on additional life. So these are 100 life gloves. I'm using fugitive boots here. Like I said in the guide, this was the one exception to a base that needed armor. Funnily enough, I had terrible luck. I wanted two-tones, but I just could not drop armor evasion base two-tones, which is the two-tone base that you want. Couldn't drop them, so I was using fugitives. However, they were rolled pretty decently. 71 life, I think is tier 2. Dex, some resistance, 30% move speed. And then most importantly, they had the open suffix for the shock and chill craft that I talked about for ailment immunity. Moving on to the amulet. I have Graceful Assault anointed because, again, mapping mostly. That has strength, int, and so it's got crafted life here, but because it has so much strength, it effectively has tier 1 or high tier 2, low tier 1 life on the amulet, which is really cool. It's additional 24 life, so that's 75 life on the amulet, as well as some flat fizz to attacks, some intelligence, which is nice, cold res, and then fizz attack damage leeches mana. It's a pretty decent amulet. It's nothing amazing. So ring 1, using an amethyst ring. Again, it has dex on it, plus 64 to life. So tier 1 or tier 2 life, plus 15% all res, plus 12 fire res, minus mana cost. Pretty simple. Now, the Warlord ring. This is a Drox ring. Mostly using this ring for Vuln on hit. It's a 2-stone, which is nice. So we got evasion, which is whatever. Intelligence, which is nice. All res, which is nice. Crafted on life. And then tier 1 Vuln on hit. Very nice damage boost. In the belt socket, we have a Stygian Vise. ES doesn't really matter. We have 90 life. So we have tier 1 life roll with decent resist rolls. And then a Abyssal Jewel socketed into it that has 18% increased damage if killed recently, some resistances, and more life. Alrighty. So back to the notes. How did I craft this gear? This will be a list of what harvest and essence rerolls to use to achieve the gear listed in the gear section of the POB, Mace excluded, since we went over the Mace up here. Ordered from best to least optimal. Helmet, you want to use Chaos, greater than Life, greater than Fire, Cold, and Lightning, greater than Defense. Chaos is so high on everything, if you're wondering, because it's pretty easy to get tier 1 life in harvest, just, you know, spamming rerolls. So it's a lot harder to get chaos res, especially a decent chaos res roll. So I value the chaos roll over the life roll. So I spam chaos on it, and then it basically is guaranteeing chaos res, and then you just go until you hit tier 1 life. That's effectively how I craft my gear. For a non-influence chest, you will prioritize chaos over life, over fire, cold, lightning, over defense. Once you get your warlord or elder influence chest, you will prioritize physical over chaos, over life, over fire, cold, lightning, over defense. Physical, the reason being is physicals give a high chance to roll the reduce reflect physical affix, which again negates the downside of Defy Pain. The gloves, chaos, life, speed, which attack speed, fire, cold, lightning, greater than physical, greater than defense. Physical because you can roll flat fizz on the gloves as well. Boots, chaos is greater than life, is greater than speed, is greater than fire, cold, lightning, is greater than defense. For move speed, if you're curious. Amulet, chaos is greater than life, is greater than speed, is greater than fire, cold, lightning, is greater than fizz, is greater than defense. Speed on the amulet being attack speed. For the belt, chaos greater than life, greater than fire, cold, lightning, greater than fizz, greater than defense. One important thing to note for some of these crafts is for the boots, it is sometimes preferable to have no move speed affix on your boots so that you can craft on move speed plus onslaught on kill. This is especially important if you decide to go for the damage Annoints and not the graceful assault Annoint to automate onslaught while mapping. If you're not running graceful assault, and I don't recommend using a silver flask past early game, definitely try to prioritize this. I think that's the optimal setup. Next up, try to get mana leech on your amulet or one of your rings to open up a jewel socket. If you do not have mana leech on your rings or your amulet, you will need to use a jewel that gives you mana leech, which you can get from Viridian jewels. I will add that up in the leveling section by the time this guide is posted for the people who want to watch the written section. Next up, sorrow essences are also a great way to craft Stygians, as dexterity isn't in their base, like their native mod pool, so you can force dexterity onto them using sorrow essences. Even if they're low level sorrow essences, getting like a 19, 25 dex, whatever, can help a lot in like rounding out the build, you know, having enough dex for faster attacks and the like. Next, a non-influenced ring you will craft with chaos is greater than life, is greater than speed, is greater than fire, cold, lightning, is greater than fizz, is greater than defense. Now the big thing here for warlord influence rings, right? Caster is so much more important than any other craft. All the other crafts are effectively the same as the non-influence one, but for warlord influence or any influence ring, mind you, always roll for casters, because caster rerolls give a incredibly high chance for it to roll curse on hit. The only thing you really have to worry about with warlord influence is that it will either hit flammability on hit or vuln on hit, but either way it has a very high chance to roll a curse on hit, and it is by far the easiest way to roll it. Don't essence spam it, don't chaos spam it, don't alteration spam it. This will get you your vuln on hit very, very quickly. Yeah, so some final notes here. I know the gear's not completely min-max. If you're seeing this and you're thinking, wait, Fizz, why don't you have an elder or a hunter belt that has % max life and things like that? Yes, I know. The goal of this guide, this video, is to give people a very clear map. If they haven't played HCSSF before, or they haven't played SSF and they don't understand how to achieve these things, giving them a map on how to do it and a reasonable goal for them to do. I do not make any of my POBs or my templates around absolutely min-max gear. Even if that may be what I end up going for on a lot of my characters, I don't make the templates like that because, one, I don't think a build should, like a POB should be based around the absolute min-max of something, especially if it's going to be used for guide purposes, like with the caveat in SSF environments, right? 99.9% of players, and probably even less, are ever going to get that in a SSF environment. It is just not realistic, in my opinion, to put all of that in a guide. Because I'm going to be blatantly honest, if you need a guide that is going to tell you how to do a lot of these things, you're not the same player as someone who's going, Fizz, where's the Elder Belt? Where's this influence item? You could min-max here. You could actually fossil craft this. Things like that. This guide is probably not for those players. And if those players are referring to this guide for something, they're going to jump to exactly what they need and not watch the whole lecture. So just a note on that. I know I went over it in the beginning, but yeah. So that is everything. I try to color code everything for you guys, make it as simple as possible. I really, really hope this helps you guys. I put a lot of work into this. Let me know. One final note, crafting in PoE is very complex. It's very hard to understand. I get it. If this doesn't click with you and you need more help, feel free to ask. You can reach me on any medium, the comment section on YouTube, in my Discord. There's links in the POB. There will also be links in the description below. You can hit me up on Twitch, whatever, DM me. Like, it doesn't matter. If you need help, like, honestly, feel free to reach out. This isn't just like a plug. Like, genuinely, I get it. Crafting is super convoluted in the game. It's very annoying to learn, especially if you're just trying to transition over into like SSF environments for the first time. It's a lot to stomach. I get it. So I think this is it. I think this is the end of the guide. Thank you so much for everyone with your support. I made this guide because it was heavily requested by people and we hit 200 YouTube subs, so I decided to do it. Again, thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it, you guys. If this helped you, please let me know. If you have any questions or you think I missed something, again, please let me know. Every build diary that I do, every league start I do, probably won't have this level of in-depth guide, but I am open to doing guides similar to this in the future, especially now that I have a decent template for it. Yeah. I think I'm gonna end the video here. If this helped you, if you want to continue to see content, you like the build diaries, stuff like that, please consider subbing. You're supposed to ring the notification bell and do all that shit too. Like the video, whatever algorithm shit. I don't know. I'm new enough to it where I don't understand why or how it helps. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, 55 minutes. It was about as long as I expected it to be. But yeah, if you made it this far, you're goated, man. You're goated. All right, boys. I will see you on the other side. After this goes live on Twitch, or after this goes live on YouTube, I will be up on Twitch streaming. There is a new, real quick before I go, there is a new, there it is, build diary series. You guys voted. Wintertide brand definitely won. So what I'm going to be doing is theory crafting up, cooking up a Wintertide build. Probably just deciding on whether I want to go Elementalist or Cultist. Yeah, that's it, boys. Have a good one. I appreciate you. Take it easy. Really hope the guide helped. Let me know. Have a good one, boys and girls and non-binaries. Peace.